The frozen wind cut through Adelaide Fletcher's wool coat like 1,000 knives, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die alone in these mountains. It was February 1878, and Adelaide had been traveling from Denver to the small mining settlement of Victor, Colorado, nestled high in the Rocky Mountains. She had taken employment as a schoolteacher, desperate for work after her father's death left her penniless in a city that had no use for unmarried women without means. The stagecoach that was supposed to deliver her safely to Victor had overturned 3 miles back when the driver lost control on an icy pass. The driver and the other passenger, an elderly merchant, had been killed instantly when the coach tumbled down a steep embankment. Adelaide had been thrown clear, landing in a deep snowbank that had likely saved her life. But now, hours later, as the blizzard intensified and darkness began to fall over the mountain wilderness, she wondered if a quick death might have been more merciful than this slow freezing. Her skirts were soaked through, weighing her down with every labored step. Her fingers had gone numb inside her thin gloves. The wind howled through the pine trees with a sound like the wailing of ghosts, and snow fell so thick she could barely see 10 feet ahead. Adelaide had tried to stay with the wreckage, knowing that was what sensible people did when stranded. But the cold had been unbearable in the growing dusk, and she had foolishly thought she might find shelter if she just kept walking. Now she was hopelessly lost, her tracks already covered by fresh snow, with no idea which direction led to safety and which led deeper into the wilderness. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. Each step required conscious effort, her body begging her to simply lie down in the soft snow and sleep. She knew that was death calling to her in a seductive whisper. If she stopped moving, she would never move again. "Please," she whispered into the wind, though she did not know who she was pleading with. God seemed very far away in this frozen hell. "Please, someone help me." The words were stolen by the gale before they left her lips. Adelaide stumbled forward, tears freezing on her cheeks when her foot caught on a hidden root. She fell hard, her face hitting the snow, and for a long moment she simply lay there. It would be so easy to stay down. So easy to let the cold take her. But something deep in her core, some stubborn flame of will that refused to be extinguished, forced her arms to move. She pushed herself up onto her hands and knees, gasping for breath, and that was when she saw them. Tracks in the snow. Fresh tracks, not yet completely filled by the falling snow. Large boot prints, far larger than her own dainty shoes could make. A man's tracks and recent. Hope surged through Adelaide's chest with an intensity that was almost painful. Someone else was out here. Someone who knew these mountains, who could help her find shelter. She forced herself to her feet and followed the tracks, moving as quickly as her exhausted body would allow. She had gone perhaps 30 yards when a figure emerged from the white curtain of snow ahead of her. Adelaide's relief turned to apprehension as the shape resolved itself into a man, but not like any man she had ever seen in Denver's civilized streets. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the storm behind him. He wore heavy furs and leather, his dark hair hanging past his shoulders and dusted with snow. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, and his eyes, when they met hers, were the color of smoke. He carried a rifle in one hand with the ease of someone who had been born holding one, and a large pack was strapped to his back. Adelaide opened her mouth to speak, to beg for help, but no words came out. The cold had stolen her voice. Her legs chose that moment to give out entirely, and she felt herself falling forward. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. The man moved with surprising speed for someone so large, his rifle somehow secured and his hands gripping her shoulders to steady her. Adelaide found herself staring up into that bearded face, close enough now to see the concern in those gray eyes. "Easy now," he said, his voice a deep rumble that she felt as much as heard. "I have got you. Please," Adelaide managed to whisper. "The stagecoach, it overturned. The others are dead." His expression grew grim. "How long have you been walking?" "I do not know. Hours, I think." He cursed softly, then without warning swept her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. Adelaide was too exhausted to protest. She felt his warmth even through their layers of clothing, and her body instinctively pressed closer to that heat. "My cabin is not far," he said, already moving through the snow with long, sure strides. "Hold on." Adelaide wanted to ask his name, wanted to thank him, but the words would not come. Instead, she let her head rest against his broad chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath the furs. She had never been carried by a man before. In her world of strict propriety and social rules, such contact would have been scandalous. But here, in this moment between life and death, propriety seemed like a distant and foolish concern. The man moved through the blizzard with the confidence of someone who knew every tree and stone of these mountains. Adelaide drifted in and out of awareness, her mind foggy with cold and exhaustion. She had vague impressions of dense forest, of the wind's fury lessening slightly, and then of a structure materializing out of the storm. The cabin was solid and well built, logs chinked tight against the weather. The man kicked the door open and carried her inside, and Adelaide gasped at the rush of warmth that enveloped them. A fire burned low in a stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the single large room. The man set her down on a chair near the fire, then immediately set about stoking the flames higher. "We need to get you out of those wet clothes," he said matter-of-factly. Adelaide's cheeks flushed despite the cold. "I could not possibly." "You will die if we do not," he interrupted, turning to face her. His expression was serious but not unkind. "Your modesty is not worth your life, miss. I have blankets you can wrap in while your clothes dry." He was right, of course. Adelaide's practical nature warred briefly with her ingrained sense of propriety, and practicality won. She nodded, her fingers fumbling uselessly at the buttons of her coat. They were frozen stiff, and her numb fingers could not manage them. The man knelt before her without a word and began unbuttoning her coat himself. His large fingers worked with surprising dexterity, quickly freeing her from the frozen garment. Adelaide sat perfectly still, acutely aware of his proximity, of the way his breath stirred the damp tendrils of hair that had escaped her bun. "My name is Warren Russell," he said as he worked, perhaps sensing that conversation might ease the awkwardness of the situation. "I have lived in these mountains for 8 years. "Adelaide Fletcher," she replied, her voice still weak. "I was traveling to Victor, to teach at the school there." Warren's hands paused briefly at this information before continuing to help her remove her outer layers. "Victor is about 15 miles northeast of here. The stage should have never tried to make that pass with a storm coming." The driver seemed confident. "The driver was a fool then. I am sorry for your loss." Adelaide thought of the 2 men who had died, and guilt washed over her that she was here, warm and safe, while they lay frozen in the wreckage. "Should we not go back for them, to at least recover the bodies?" Warren shook his head, rising to fetch thick wool blankets from a trunk against the wall. "Not until the storm passes. It would be suicide to go back out there now, and those men are beyond help. I will report it to the marshal in Victor when the weather clears, and men will be sent to recover them." He held up the blankets, averting his eyes. "You can change behind those blankets. I will turn around." True to his word, Warren turned to face the wall while Adelaide stripped out of her wet dress, petticoats and under things. Her fingers were clumsy and slow, but gradually she managed to remove the frozen garments and wrap herself in the blankets. They were scratchy against her bare skin, but gloriously warm. "I am decent," she said softly. Warren turned back and began hanging her wet clothes on a line strung near the fireplace. Adelaide watched him move around the cabin, taking in her surroundings properly for the first time. The space was simple but well maintained. There was a large bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and various tools and traps hanging from the walls. Animal pelts were stacked neatly in one corner, evidence of Warren's profession as a fur trapper. "Are you hungry?" Warren asked, moving to the fire where a pot hung on an iron hook. Adelaide realized that she was starving. She had not eaten since early morning, and her body desperately needed fuel to fight off the cold. "Yes, please." Warren ladled something from the pot into a wooden bowl and brought it to her. It was a thick stew, rich with meat and vegetables. Adelaide ate ravenously, not caring about her usual careful manners. The hot food spread warmth through her body, and she felt strength slowly returning to her limbs. Warren watched her with those steady gray eyes, and Adelaide found herself unable to read his expression. He was so different from the men she had known in Denver. The merchants and clerks, the bankers and lawyers who had occasionally called on her father, all carefully groomed and proper in their suits and manners. Warren Russell was raw and elemental, a man shaped by wilderness rather than civilization. The muscles of his shoulders and arms were evident even beneath his heavy shirt, built by years of hard physical labor. His hands were scarred and calloused, capable and strong. "Thank you," Adelaide said when she had finished the stew. "You saved my life." Warren shrugged, taking the bowl from her. "Any man would have done the same." "I am not so certain of that. These mountains are vast. What were you doing out in the storm?" "Checking my trap lines before the worst of the weather hit." "I saw the wreckage of the stage and found your tracks leading away from it. I followed them." "You tracked me through the snow, in that blizzard?" "Yes." The simple word held so much. He had risked his own life to follow her trail to find a stranger lost in the wilderness. Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by exhaustion and gratitude and the magnitude of what had almost happened to her. "I do not know how I can ever repay such kindness," she whispered. Warren's expression softened slightly. "There is no debt. I am glad I found you in time." He moved to the window, peering out at the storm. "This will blow for at least another day, maybe 2. You will have to stay here until it is safe to travel." Adelaide nodded, pulling the blankets tighter around herself. The impropriety of the situation would have scandalized Denver society. An unmarried woman, alone with a man, sharing his cabin. Her reputation would be destroyed if word got out. But what choice did she have? And more importantly, did she even care? Those social rules seemed meaningless here in this place where survival trumped everything else. "I will sleep on the floor," Warren said, as if reading her thoughts. "You can have the bed." "I could not ask you to give up your own bed." "You are not asking, I am offering." His tone made it clear that argument would be futile. Adelaide was too tired to protest further. The warmth of the fire, the food in her belly, and the sheer exhaustion of her ordeal were catching up with her. Her eyelids felt impossibly heavy. Warren seemed to notice. "Rest now. You are safe here." Those words, spoken with such quiet certainty, broke through the last of Adelaide's defenses. She began to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for the terror of being lost in the storm, for the men who had died in the crash, for her father whose death had set her on this path, for the overwhelming relief of being alive. Warren moved to her side, kneeling beside her chair. He did not touch her, but his presence was steady and comforting. "You are safe," he repeated softly. "Let it out. You have been through hell today." Adelaide cried until she had no tears left, until she was empty and exhausted and strangely cleansed. Warren waited patiently through it all, then helped her to the bed when she was ready. The mattress was stuffed with pine needles and softer than it looked. Adelaide sank into it gratefully, still wrapped in her blankets. "Sleep," Warren said. "I will be right here if you need anything." Adelaide watched through heavy-lidded eyes as Warren moved around the cabin, banking the fire for the night and laying out blankets for himself on the floor. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was his large form stretched out before the hearth, and she felt utterly safe for the first time since the stage had overturned. When Adelaide woke, pale gray light was filtering through the cabin's single window. The storm still raged outside, wind howling around the corners of the cabin. She lay still for a moment, taking stock of her body. She was sore all over, her muscles protesting yesterday's ordeal, but she was warm and alive. The smell of coffee filled the cabin. Adelaide sat up, careful to keep her blankets wrapped around her, and saw Warren at the fireplace preparing breakfast. He had his back to her, and she took a moment to study him properly. Even in repose, he radiated strength. His shoulders were impossibly broad, his arms thick with muscle as he worked. His dark hair hung loose around his face, and Adelaide found herself wondering what he would look like clean-shaven, then immediately felt her cheeks heat at such a forward thought. "Good morning," she said softly. Warren turned, and Adelaide was struck again by his eyes. In the better light of morning, she could see they were not pure gray but flecked with darker charcoal around the edges. "Morning. How do you feel?" "Sore, but well. Much better than I have any right to feel." She glanced toward the window. "The storm has not let up." "No. It will likely blow all day and into tomorrow. We are snowed in completely." Adelaide absorbed this information. Another full day, possibly two, trapped in this small cabin with Warren Russell. "I am sorry to be such an imposition." "You are not." Warren poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Here, it will help warm you." Adelaide accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The coffee was strong and bitter, nothing like the delicate tea she had been accustomed to in Denver, but it was exactly what she needed. "Your clothes are mostly dry," Warren said, gesturing to the line by the fire. "You can dress after breakfast if you like." Adelaide felt a rush of relief at the prospect of being properly clothed again. "Thank you." Warren served breakfast, which consisted of cornmeal mush sweetened with molasses and strips of fried venison. They ate in companionable silence, and Adelaide found herself stealing glances at her rescuer. He ate with the efficiency of a man accustomed to solitude, but his manners were not crude. There was a natural grace to his movements despite his size. "Have you always lived in these mountains?" Adelaide asked, curiosity getting the better of her. Warren was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. "No, I came west after the war between the states. Yes, I fought for the Union. When it was over, I could not go back to what I had been before. Too much had changed. I was changed." He stared into his coffee. "So I came here where a man can live by his own rules and not have to answer to anyone." Adelaide heard the pain beneath his words, the weight of experiences he was not ready to share. She understood that impulse. "I am sorry. War is a terrible thing." "It is, but it is long past now." Warren's expression cleared, and he looked at her with genuine interest. "What about you? What brings a city woman to a rough mining town like Victor?" Adelaide set down her cup. "Necessity, I suppose. My father died 6 months ago. He left debts I did not know about. Everything we had went to pay them. I was left with nothing and no prospects for marriage. Teaching was the only respectable work available to me, and positions in Denver were scarce. When I heard Victor needed a teacher, I applied immediately. That took courage. Most women in your situation would have sought a husband. Perhaps, but I have never been particularly interested in marriage for its own sake. I would rather make my own way than attach myself to a man out of desperation. Adelaide paused, then added with a wry smile, "Though I suppose my current situation rather proves the limits of my independence. I would be dead if not for you." "Independence does not mean refusing help when it is needed," Warren said. "It means standing on your own 2 feet when you can. What happened to you was an accident, not a failure." His words settled something in Adelaide's chest that she had not realized was unsettled. She smiled at him, a genuine warm smile, and was rewarded with a slight upturn of his lips beneath his beard. It was hardly a smile, but it transformed his stern face, making him seem younger and less forbidding. After breakfast, Adelaide dressed behind a blanket Warren held up for modesty. Her clothes were stiff from drying but warm and blessedly dry. When she was decent, she attempted to do something with her hair, which had come completely loose from its pins during her ordeal. She had nothing to properly style it with, so she simply braided it as best she could and let it hang down her back. The day passed slowly. The storm showed no signs of abating, and the cabin felt smaller with each passing hour. Warren kept himself busy with small tasks, maintaining his traps and gear, while Adelaide explored the limited space, examining his modest collection of books on a rough shelf. To her surprise, the selection was varied and well-worn: Shakespeare, Homer, even some Wordsworth poetry. "You are a reader," she observed with delight. Warren looked up from the trap he was repairing. "Surprises you, forgive me. I should not have made assumptions based on your profession." "Most people do." He did not sound offended. "My mother was a schoolteacher back in Pennsylvania. She made sure I had an education before I went off to war. Out here, books are one of the few things that keeps the loneliness at bay during the long winters. Do you get lonely?" Adelaide asked before she could stop herself. Warren's hands stilled on his work. "Sometimes. But solitude suits me better than crowds. I came here to escape the noise of the world, and I have never regretted that choice. Still, it must be difficult, having no one to talk to for months at a time. I go into Victor for supplies a few times a year. That is enough social interaction for me." He resumed working on the trap. "What about you? Will you not miss Denver? The theaters and shops, the society?" Adelaide laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I was never truly part of that world, even when my father was alive. We were genteel poor, always one step away from losing what little status we had. The theaters and shops were for looking, not for us. And society." She shook her head. "Society is a cage dressed up in pretty manners and expensive clothes. I am not sorry to leave it behind." Warren looked at her with new interest. "You are not what I expected. What did you expect? A pampered city girl who would fall apart at the first sign of hardship. But you have backbone. You survived that storm longer than most men would have." Adelaide felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. Compliments from Warren Russell, she sensed, were rare and therefore valuable. "I discovered reserves of stubbornness I did not know I possessed." When faced with death, one finds motivation to keep moving. The afternoon wore on. Adelaide read while Warren worked, and gradually a comfortable silence settled over the cabin. Adelaide found herself acutely aware of Warren's presence, of the way he moved, of the rare occasions when his eyes would drift to her. There was something magnetic about him, something that drew her attention again and again. By evening, the storm had intensified, if anything. The wind shrieked around the cabin, and snow piled high against the walls. But inside, the fire burned warm and supper filled their bellies. Warren had an old harmonica, and after they ate, he played for her. The music was melancholy and beautiful, filling the cabin with haunting melodies that spoke of loneliness and longing. "That was lovely," Adelaide said when he finished. "Where did you learn to play?" "My father taught me. It was one of the few things we shared." Warren set the harmonica aside carefully. "Music has a way of saying things words cannot." "Yes," Adelaide agreed softly. "It does." Their eyes met across the firelight, and Adelaide felt something shift between them, an awareness, a connection that went beyond rescuer and rescued. Warren was the first to look away, but Adelaide saw color rise in his neck above his collar. "You should sleep," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Tomorrow will be a long day if the storm breaks." Adelaide wanted to protest, to continue this moment of intimacy, but she recognized the wisdom in his words. She retired to the bed while Warren made his pallet on the floor, but sleep was a long time coming. Adelaide lay in the darkness, listening to the storm outside and Warren's steady breathing below, and wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Everything was buried under at least 3 feet of fresh powder, and the sunlight reflecting off the white landscape was blinding. Warren surveyed the scene from the cabin doorway. "The drifts are deep. It will be slow going, but I can get you to Victor today if we start soon." Adelaide felt an unexpected pang at the thought of leaving. These 2 days in the cabin with Warren had been strange and improper and completely unlike her normal life, but she had felt more herself here than she had in years. Still, she had a position to take up, a new life waiting for her in Victor. "I am ready whenever you are," she said, trying to inject confidence into her voice. Warren packed supplies for the journey while Adelaide tidied the cabin, feeling oddly domestic as she made the bed and washed the breakfast dishes. When everything was ready, Warren handed her a pair of snowshoes. "Have you ever used these?" he asked. Adelaide shook her head. "I will show you. It is not difficult, but it takes practice." For the next hour, Warren patiently taught Adelaide how to walk in snowshoes, demonstrating the technique and catching her each time she stumbled. His hands were gentle but firm on her arms, steadying her, and Adelaide found herself very aware of each point of contact between them. Finally, she got the hang of it, and they set off toward Victor. Warren broke trail ahead of her, his powerful legs churning through the deep snow with steady determination. Adelaide followed in his path, grateful for his strength. Even with snowshoes, the journey was exhausting. They stopped several times to rest, and during one such break, Warren pointed out the site where the stagecoach had overturned. The wreckage was almost completely buried under snow, only the top of one wheel visible. Adelaide felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold as she thought about how close she had come to sharing the fate of the other passengers. "I will send men to recover them," Warren said quietly. "They deserve a proper burial." Adelaide nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They pressed on. The mountains were breathtaking in the clear winter light, all sharp peaks and pristine snow under an impossibly blue sky. Adelaide had never seen country so wild and beautiful. Despite her exhaustion, she felt exhilarated, alive in a way she had never experienced in the comfortable confines of Denver society. Warren seemed to sense her mood. "It gets in your blood, this country," he said. "Once you have lived with this much space and freedom, cities feel like prisons." "I can understand that," Adelaide replied. "Even after just these few days, I feel different, changed somehow." Warren looked back at her, and something in his expression made Adelaide's breath catch, but before she could identify what she saw in his eyes, he turned away and resumed walking. It was late afternoon when they crested a ridge and saw Victor spread out in the valley below. The town was larger than Adelaide had expected, a sprawling collection of wooden buildings clustered around the mining operations. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and even from this distance she could hear the faint sounds of industry. "There it is," Warren said. "Your new home." Adelaide stared at the town, and instead of excitement, she felt only a strange reluctance. Leaving the mountains meant leaving Warren, and she was surprised by how much that thought bothered her. They descended toward the town in silence. As they drew closer, people began to notice them, pointing and calling out. Word of the stage accident must have already reached Victor. A crowd gathered as they entered the main street, and a tall man wearing a marshal's badge pushed through to meet them. "Warren Russell," the marshal said, surprise evident in his voice. "Did not expect to see you in town for another month at least." "Marshal Hayes," Warren replied with a nod. "I found this woman lost in the storm 2 days ago. She was on the stage that overturned on Willow Pass." The marshal turned to Adelaide, his expression grave. "Madam, we heard about the accident from a rider who came through yesterday. He said there were no survivors." "The driver and another passenger were killed," Adelaide said. "I was thrown clear. Mr. Russell tracked me through the snow and brought me to his cabin for shelter." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The marshal studied Warren with new respect. "That was well done. The storm was fierce. She would have died out there." "Anyone would have done the same," Warren said, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "Not anyone could have," the marshal corrected. "Most men would have lost her trail in that weather." He turned back to Adelaide. "You are the new school teacher, are you not?" "Adelaide Fletcher. Yes, I apologize for arriving in such irregular fashion." The marshal actually smiled. "Miss Fletcher, given what you have been through, I think we can excuse any irregularities. Come, let me show you to your lodgings. The town has arranged a room for you at Mrs. Calloway's boarding house." Adelaide nodded, but her eyes were on Warren. He stood slightly apart from the crowd, his pack still on his shoulders, already looking like he was preparing to leave. The thought of him simply walking away, of never seeing him again, created a physical ache in her chest. "Mr. Russell," she said, stepping toward him, "I never properly thanked you. You saved my life." Warren's gray eyes met hers, and for a moment the crowd seemed to fade away. "You do not need to thank me. I am just glad I found you in time. Still, I am grateful, more than I can express." Something flickered in Warren's expression, there and gone too quickly to identify. "You will do well here, Miss Fletcher. You have the strength for this country." He said it like a farewell, and Adelaide felt panic rise in her throat. "Will I see you again?" Warren hesitated. "I come to town for supplies occasionally. Perhaps our paths will cross." It was not enough, but Adelaide could not beg him to stay, not here in front of all these people. She extended her hand, a formal gesture that felt entirely inadequate for what she was feeling. "Goodbye, then. And thank you again." Warren took her hand, his large calloused palm engulfing her smaller one. He held it perhaps a moment longer than propriety dictated, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that felt intentional. "Goodbye, Miss Fletcher." Then he released her hand, turned and walked away. Adelaide watched him go, fighting the irrational urge to run after him. The crowd pressed around her, people introducing themselves and asking questions about the accident, but Adelaide barely heard them. Her eyes stayed fixed on Warren's broad back until he disappeared around a corner. Marshal Hayes touched her elbow gently. "Miss Fletcher, shall I show you to Mrs. Calloway's?" Adelaide dragged her attention back to the present. "Yes, of course. Thank you, Marshal, Mrs. Calloway's boarding house was clean and respectable. run by a widow in her 50s who fussed over Adelaide like a mother hen when she heard about the accident. The room was small but comfortable, with a real bed and even a small stove. It was vastly more civilized than Warren's cabin, yet Adelaide felt none of the contentment she had experienced there. Over the next few days, Adelaide settled into her new life. The school was a simple one-room building on the edge of town, and she had 16 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. The children were rough around the edges but eager to learn, and Adelaide found satisfaction in the work. Yet every evening, when she returned to her room at the boarding house, she found her thoughts drifting to Warren. She wondered what he was doing, whether he thought of her at all, whether those 2 days in his cabin had meant anything to him beyond a simple act of kindness. She told herself she was being foolish, that she barely knew the man, but her heart refused to listen to reason. Victor was indeed a rough mining town, but it had its charms. The people were hearty and genuine, without the pretensions of Denver society. Adelaide made friends with some of the other women, including Sarah Bennett, the doctor's wife, who invited her to dinner one evening. "You have adapted well," Sarah commented as they shared tea after the meal. "Many women from the city struggle with the isolation and rough conditions here." "I find I prefer it to city life," Adelaide admitted. "There is an honesty to this place. People are who they are without artifice." Sarah smiled knowingly. "I felt the same when I first came here. Although," she added with a mischievous glint in her eye, "I had additional motivation to stay." Love has a way of making even the roughest circumstances bearable. Adelaide felt her cheeks warm. "I am sure I do not know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do. The whole town is talking about how Warren Russell brought you in from the storm. That man has lived alone in these mountains for 8 years, never showing interest in anyone. Now he risks his life to track a stranger through a blizzard." "He would have done the same for anyone," Adelaide protested. "Perhaps, but the way you looked at each other when you arrived." "That was not the look of strangers, Adelaide." Adelaide stared into her teacup, unable to deny the truth of Sarah's words. "It does not matter. He has gone back to his mountain and I am here. We live in different worlds. Worlds can be bridged if both parties are willing." Before Adelaide could respond, the door burst open and Marshall Hayes strode in, his expression urgent. "Dr. Bennett, we need you. There has been a mine collapse, multiple injuries." The doctor was already grabbing his bag. Sarah stood as well, reaching for her coat. "I will assist," she said to her husband, then turned to Adelaide. "Will you help? We will need extra hands." Adelaide did not hesitate. "Of course." The scene at the mine was chaos. 7 men had been trapped when a support beam gave way, and 3 had been badly injured. Adelaide helped as best she could, holding lanterns while the doctor worked, fetching supplies and comforting the injured men. It was gruesome, difficult work, but Adelaide did not flinch from it. By the time they finished, it was near midnight. All 7 miners would survive, thanks to the doctor's skill and quick action. Adelaide returned to the boarding house exhausted but oddly energized. She had proven something to herself tonight, that she could face hardship without falling apart. As she lay in bed, however, her thoughts returned to Warren. She wondered if he had heard about the mine collapse, if he knew she had helped. Then she chided herself for such foolishness. Why would he care? He had moved on with his life as she should move on with hers. March arrived, bringing slightly warmer temperatures but still plenty of snow. Adelaide had been in Victor for 3 weeks, and she had established a comfortable routine. She taught her students during the day, took her meals at the boarding house, and spent her evenings preparing lessons or reading. It was a good life, satisfying in many ways, but something was missing. Adelaide felt it like a hollow space in her chest, an ache that would not quite go away. She tried to tell herself she was simply lonely, that she needed to make more friends and engage more with the community. But she knew the truth. She missed Warren Russell with an intensity that frightened her. She had known him for only 2 days. It was ridiculous to feel this way about a man she barely knew. Yet those 2 days had been unlike anything she had experienced. In Warren's presence, she had felt truly seen, truly valued for who she was rather than what society expected her to be. Adelaide was walking back from the school one afternoon when she saw a familiar figure outside the general store. Her heart leaped into her throat. Warren stood beside a pack horse, loading supplies, his back to her. He wore the same heavy furs and leather, his dark hair pulled back from his face. Adelaide found herself walking toward him before consciously deciding to do so. "Mr. Russell," she called out. Warren turned, and Adelaide saw surprise flash across his face, followed by something warmer. "Miss Fletcher, how are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you. The students are delightful and the town has been welcoming." Adelaide stopped a few feet away, suddenly unsure what to say. "How have you been?" "Well enough. Just came in for supplies." He seemed as awkward as she felt, his hands fumbling with the rope he was tying. They stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Adelaide cast about for something to say, anything to prolong this conversation. "Thank you again for reporting the stage accident. I heard the bodies were recovered and given proper burial. It was the right thing to do." Another silence fell. Adelaide could feel the moment slipping away, Warren preparing to leave again, and desperation made her bold. "Would you have supper with me? At the boarding house. Mrs. Calloway sets a fine table and I would enjoy the company." Warren looked startled by the invitation. He glanced around as if checking whether anyone had overheard, then back at Adelaide. "I do not think that would be proper. I am merely inviting you to share a meal in a public boarding house, not proposing anything scandalous," Adelaide said, though her cheeks burned. "You saved my life, Mr. Russell. Surely I am allowed to buy you supper." A smile tugged at the corner of Warren's mouth. "You are persistent. I prefer to think of it as determined." Warren studied her for a long moment and Adelaide held her breath. Finally he nodded. "All right, one supper." Adelaide's heart soared. "Wonderful. Mrs. Calloway serves at 6 o'clock. Warren arrived at the boarding house precisely at 6, his hair still damp from washing and his beard neatly trimmed. He had traded his heavy furs for a clean wool shirt that only emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the muscular contours of his arms. Several of the other boarders stared openly as he entered, and Adelaide felt a proprietary satisfaction that he was here for her. Mrs. Calloway had outdone herself with the meal: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Adelaide and Warren sat at the corner of the long table, and conversation flowed more easily than Adelaide had expected. Warren asked about her teaching, and she told him stories about her students that made him smile. She asked about his life in the mountains, and he described his daily routines, the animals he trapped, the stark beauty of the high country in winter. "You never get frightened?" Adelaide asked. "Being so isolated, so far from help if something went wrong." "Fear is just part of life out there," Warren said, cutting into his beef. "But I am careful and I know my limits. Besides, the mountains are honest. If you respect them, follow their rules, they will not betray you. People are far less predictable. You do not trust easily." "No," Warren met her eyes, "but then again, neither do you." Adelaide was surprised by his insight. "What makes you say that? You keep yourself controlled, Miss Fletcher, always proper, always measured." "But I saw you in the cabin when you let your guard down. There is more to you than this schoolteacher facade." Adelaide felt exposed, as if Warren could see straight through to her core. Perhaps we both wear facades, the hermit mountain man who needs no one. Is that any more real than my careful propriety? Warren's expression grew serious. Perhaps not. Perhaps we are both hiding from something. And what are you hiding from, Mr. Russell? The same thing everyone who came west is hiding from, the past, mistakes, regrets. He paused, then added quietly, myself. The honesty in his words pierced Adelaide's heart. She reached across the table without thinking, placing her hand over his. I do not think you are as alone as you pretend to be. If you were, you would not have risked everything to track me through that storm. Warren looked down at their joined hands but did not pull away. Maybe you are right. They finished the meal in charged silence, both acutely aware of the connection building between them. When Warren finally prepared to leave, Adelaide walked him to the door despite Mrs. Calloway's raised eyebrows. Thank you for coming, Adelaide said softly. It meant a great deal to me. Thank you for inviting me. Warren hesitated, then said, I will be in town next month for supplies. Perhaps we could do this again. Hope bloomed in Adelaide's chest. I would like that very much. Warren nodded, then surprised her by taking her hand and raising it briefly to his lips. The gesture was old-fashioned and formal, but the look in his eyes was anything but. Good night, Adelaide. It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his deep voice sent shivers down her spine. Good night, Warren. She watched him disappear into the darkness, her hand still tingling from his touch, and knew with absolute certainty that she was falling in love with Warren Russell. April brought the first real signs of spring. Snow still crowned the peaks, but the valleys began to green, and wildflowers pushed through the remaining patches of snow. Adelaide threw herself into her work, trying to distract herself from thoughts of Warren. But every day she found herself scanning the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of his tall form. True to his word, Warren came to town in mid-April. This time he sought Adelaide out at the school, arriving just as she was dismissing her students for the day. The children clustered around him, fascinated by this giant of a man who seemed to have stepped out of a wilderness tale. Warren handled their questions with surprising patience, telling them about tracking and trapping, about the animals of the high country. Adelaide watched him with the children and felt her heart expand. There was gentleness beneath his rough exterior, a kindness he kept hidden but which emerged in moments like this. After the children finally dispersed, Warren turned to Adelaide. I was hoping we could take a walk. If you are not too tired, I would love that. They walked along the edge of town, following a path that led toward the foothills. The afternoon sun was warm on Adelaide's face and she tilted her head back to enjoy it. You look happy, Warren observed. I am. Teaching suits me. And Victor has become home faster than I expected. I am glad. Warren was quiet for a moment, then said, I have been thinking about you, more than I probably should. Adelaide's breath caught. Have you? Yes. These past weeks working my trap lines, I kept remembering our talks. The way you argued with me about propriety. He smiled slightly. You are not like anyone I have met before, Adelaide. You are not what I expected either, Adelaide admitted. When I first saw you in the storm, I thought you seemed almost frightening, but you have been nothing but kind. Do I still frighten you? Adelaide stopped walking and turned to face him. No, you make me feel safe, protected, like nothing bad could happen as long as you were there. Warren's eyes darkened with emotion. Adelaide, I am not good at this. Words, feelings. I have spent 8 years avoiding both. Then let me speak plainly, Adelaide said, her heart pounding. These weeks apart have been difficult for me. I have missed you terribly, which is absurd since I barely know you, but I cannot help what I feel. You feel it too, then? Warren stepped closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. I thought I was going mad. You are all I think about. "What do we do?" Adelaide asked. "Your life is in the mountains, mine is here." Warren reached out, hesitantly at first, then cupped her face with his large hand. His palm was warm and calloused against her cheek. "I do not know, but I know I cannot walk away from this, from you." Adelaide leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them again, Warren's face was close to hers, his intent clear in his eyes. "May I kiss you?" he asked roughly. "Yes," Adelaide breathed. Warren's lips met hers in a kiss that was surprisingly gentle for such a large man. But there was hunger beneath the gentleness, a leashed passion that made Adelaide's knees weak. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, feeling the solid muscle beneath her fingers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Warren rested his forehead against hers. "Adelaide, I am not a civilized man. I live rough in the wilderness. But I swear to you, I will do everything in my power to make you happy if you will give me a chance." "Are you asking to court me?" "I suppose I am, though I am making a poor job of it." Adelaide laughed, joy bubbling up in her chest. "I think you are doing wonderfully. And yes, Warren Russell, I will let you court me." Warren pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, and Adelaide felt like she had finally found her place in the world. Over the next months, Warren courted Adelaide with a determination that surprised the whole town. He came to Victor every week, staying at the small hotel and spending his days with Adelaide. They took long walks together, exploring the mountains surrounding the town. Warren taught her to identify animal tracks and edible plants, while Adelaide shared her love of books and poetry. The courtship was unconventional by any standard. Warren was blunt where society expected flowery flattery, practical where others might have been romantic. But Adelaide treasured every moment. When Warren told her she was strong, she believed it. When he said she was beautiful, she felt it in her bones. He carved her a small wooden box inlaid with intricate designs, working on it by firelight in his hotel room. When he presented it to her, his hands were uncharacteristically nervous. "It is for your things," he said gruffly. "I know ladies have things they like to keep safe." Adelaide traced the delicate carvings, her eyes filling with tears. "It is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. You deserve beautiful things." "I have you," Adelaide said simply. "That is all I need." By June, Warren had stopped returning to his cabin entirely. He took a permanent room at the hotel and found work as a hunting guide, leading wealthy Easterners on expeditions into the high country. The work paid well and kept him close to Adelaide, which was all he wanted. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Warren took Adelaide's hand. "Marry me," he said, characteristically direct. Adelaide's heart leaped, but she had to be sure. "Are you certain? I know you value your independence." "I value you more." Warren turned to face her fully. "Adelaide, these months with you have been the happiest of my life. I do not want to spend another day without you. I know I am not the husband you probably imagined. I am rough and scarred, and I will never be comfortable at fancy dinners or social gatherings, but I love you with everything I am." Tears streamed down Adelaide's face. "You are exactly the husband I imagined, even if I did not know it until I met you. Yes, Warren. Yes, I will marry you." Warren let out a breath, relief and joy washing over his features. He pulled Adelaide into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, not caring who might see. Adelaide kissed him back with equal passion, her hands tangling in his long hair. When they finally broke apart, Warren reached into his pocket. "I made this for you." He held out a ring, simple but beautifully crafted from silver, with a small blue stone set in the center. "The stone is from a stream high up in the mountains. It reminded me of your eyes." Adelaide held out her trembling hand, and Warren slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been meant for her all along. They were married in August, in the small church at the center of Victor. The whole town turned out for the wedding, curious to see the mountain man and the schoolteacher make their vows. Adelaide wore a simple blue dress, and Warren had trimmed his beard and tied back his hair, though he still looked more wild than civilized in his dark suit. As they stood before the minister, exchanging promises to love and honor each other, Adelaide thought back to that terrible day in February when she had been certain she would die in the snow. If someone had told her then that her tragedy would lead to this perfect happiness, she would never have believed them. But here she was, pledging her life to a man who had tracked her through a blizzard and into her heart. "I love you," Warren whispered as he slipped a gold band onto her finger. "I love you," Adelaide replied, her voice strong and sure. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Warren kissed Adelaide with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance wiped away tears. Adelaide kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture, and knew that she had finally, truly, come home. They spent their wedding night in the hotel, and Warren was gentle with Adelaide, taking his time, making sure she felt cherished. In the morning, as Adelaide lay in his arms, she traced the scars on his chest, remnants of his time in the war. "Tell me about them," she said softly. Warren was quiet for a long moment. "That is a lot of ugliness to bring into our happiness. Your past is part of who you are." "I want to know all of you, Warren, not just the easy parts." So Warren told her about the battles he had fought, the friends he had lost, the things he had seen and done that haunted him still. He spoke of the despair that had driven him into the mountains, the self-imposed exile that was as much punishment as sanctuary. Adelaide listened without judgment, her hand over his heart, and when he finished, she simply held him. "You are a good man," she said firmly. "Whatever you did in war, whatever ghosts you carry, you are good. You proved that when you came after me in the storm. You prove it every day with your kindness and your strength." Warren pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "I do not deserve you. You deserve happiness. We both do." They had talked about where they would live after the wedding. Adelaide had assumed they would stay in Victor, where she could continue teaching. But Warren surprised her one morning in September by taking her to see a piece of land a few miles outside of town. "I bought this," he said, gesturing to the clearing surrounded by pines. "If you agree, I thought we could build a house here, close enough to town for your teaching but far enough out that we have space and quiet. There is a stream for water and the land is good. We could have a garden, maybe some chickens." Adelaide looked at the spot, imagining a home there, their home. "It is perfect. But Warren, building a house is expensive. Can we afford it? I have money saved from my trapping years, and I will keep guiding hunters through the fall. We will manage." He looked at her hopefully. "Do you like it?" "I love it. But more importantly, I love that you thought of it. A place that is ours, where we can build our life together." Warren's face broke into a rare, full smile that transformed his stern features. "Then we will start building next spring." That winter was Adelaide's first as a married woman, and she had never been happier. She continued teaching while Warren guided hunters and trapped furs. They stayed in the hotel room but spent their evenings planning their future house, sketching layouts and discussing details. Warren wanted a large fireplace and plenty of windows to let in light. Adelaide wanted bookshelves and a real kitchen. In February, exactly 1 year after the blizzard that had brought them together, Warren woke Adelaide early and bundled her into warm clothes. "Where are we going?" she asked, still sleepy. "You will see." Warren led her out of town and up into the foothills, following a trail Adelaide did not recognize. They walked for over an hour, Warren breaking trail through the snow while Adelaide followed. Finally, they emerged into a small clearing. Adelaide recognized it immediately. This was where Warren had found her that day, where she had collapsed in the snow and he had caught her. The tree she had fallen against was still there, distinctive with its lightning-scarred trunk. "I wanted to show you this place in daylight," Warren said, "to remind you how far you have come. A year ago you were dying here, now look at you, thriving in this country, building a life stronger than you ever imagined you could be." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. "I could not have done any of it without you. You are wrong. You would have found your way, you have that kind of strength inside you." Warren took her hands. "But I am glad I got to be part of your journey, glad that blizzard brought you into my life." "Not half as glad as I am," Adelaide said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved." They stood in that clearing, holding each other as snow began to fall softly around them, and Adelaide marveled at the strange paths life could take. She had come to Colorado seeking independence and a fresh start. She had found so much more than that. She had found love, purpose, belonging. She had found home. That spring, Warren began building their house with help from men in Victor who had come to respect the quiet mountain man. Adelaide spent her days teaching and her afternoons at the building site, helping where she could and watching their dream take shape. The house was solid and beautiful, built to last generations. By summer, it was finished. They moved in on a blazing June day, carrying their few possessions into rooms that still smelled of fresh cut pine. That first night they lay in their own bed in their own house, and Adelaide felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Warren's arms tightened around her. "For building this, for building us. I would build you the world if I could." In August, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but wanted to be certain before telling Warren. When she finally did, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around despite her protests, his face split in a huge grin. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "You are happy?" Adelaide asked, though his joy was obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it." Warren set her down gently, his hands moving to her still flat stomach with wonder. "I never thought I would have this. A family. A real home." Adelaide covered his hands with hers. "You have it now. We both do." Warren was protective before, but with Adelaide pregnant, he became almost comically overprotective. He did not want her walking to school alone, insisted she rest frequently, and worried constantly about her health. Adelaide bore it with good humor, knowing it came from love. Her pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. She had to stop teaching in January, when the walk to school became too difficult. Instead, she spent her days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets while Warren added a cradle he had crafted with his own hands. On a snowy February morning, Adelaide went into labor. Warren rode like a demon to fetch the doctor and Sarah Bennett, then paced the house like a caged animal while Adelaide labored in their bedroom. Sarah came out several times to assure him that everything was progressing normally, but Warren could not be calm. The sound of Adelaide's pain tore at him. Finally, after hours that felt like days, a baby's cry rang through the house. Warren burst through the bedroom door to find Adelaide propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing with a tiny bundle in her arms. "A son," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Warren, we have a son." Warren approached slowly, almost reverently. He looked down at the tiny red face of his child and felt his heart crack open. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Would you like to hold him?" Warren's hands, so capable and strong with everything else, trembled as Adelaide placed the baby in his arms. The child was impossibly small against his broad chest, but Warren held him with absolute confidence, as if he had been born to do this. "Hello, little one," Warren murmured. "I am your father, and I promise you I will spend every day of my life making sure you are safe and loved and happy." Adelaide watched her husband with their son and felt tears stream down her face. This man, who had lived alone in the wilderness for so many years, had become the most devoted husband and now father. He had given her everything she needed, everything she had not even known to want. They named the boy James, after Warren's father. James Russell grew into a sturdy child with his father's gray eyes and his mother's smile. Warren was besotted with his son, carrying him everywhere, teaching him about the world with infinite patience. Adelaide returned to teaching when James was a year old, bringing him with her to school. The students adored having a baby in the classroom, and James seemed to enjoy the attention. Their life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Adelaide teaching, Warren guiding and hunting, both of them raising their son in the house they had built together. 2 years after James was born, Adelaide gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. She had her mother's blonde hair and her father's steady temperament. Warren, who had been an attentive father with James, was utterly helpless in the face of his tiny daughter. Rose could wrap him around her little finger with a single smile. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Adelaide watched Warren teach their children to track animals and respect the wilderness. Warren watched Adelaide instill in them a love of learning and books. Together, they raised their children with love and discipline, teaching them to be strong but kind, independent but compassionate. Victor grew and changed around them. The mining industry boomed and eventually declined. New people came while others left. But Warren and Adelaide remained constant, their love a steady flame that never dimmed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Warren surprised Adelaide by taking her back to his old cabin. He had maintained it over the years, using it occasionally during hunting expeditions. Adelaide had not been there since those 2 days when he had saved her life. The cabin looked smaller than she remembered, but it was still cozy and warm. Warren had prepared everything in advance, bringing food and wine, building up the fire. That night, as they lay together in the bed where Adelaide had first slept as a rescued stranger, Warren pulled her close. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Giving up your independence, tying yourself to a rough mountain man?" Adelaide laughed. "Warren Russell, you ask me this question every few years and my answer never changes. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You did not take my independence. You gave me the freedom to be fully myself." "I love you," Warren said, kissing her temple, "more now than the day I married you. I love you too. Thank you for tracking me through that blizzard, for bringing me home." "You are my home," Warren replied. "You have been since the moment I first saw you." They made love in the cabin where their story had begun, and Adelaide marveled at how far they had come. From strangers thrown together by fate to partners who knew each other's souls completely, more years passed. James grew into a strong young man who decided to follow his father's path, becoming a guide and hunter. Rose proved to have her mother's gift for teaching, and eventually took over Adelaide's position at the school when Adelaide decided to retire. Warren's hair turned silver, and Adelaide's face gained the lines of a life well lived, but their love remained as fierce and true as it had been in the beginning. In 1895, on a clear autumn day, Warren and Adelaide sat on the porch of the house Warren had built with his own hands. Their grandchildren played in the yard, James's 3 boys and Rose's twin daughters. The mountains stretched out before them, the same peaks that had nearly claimed Adelaide's life all those years ago. "You remember the day we met?" Adelaide asked, her hand in Warren's. "Every detail," Warren replied. "I remember seeing your tracks in the snow, following them, wondering what kind of fool would wander so far from the wreckage. Then I saw you, and you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Stubborn and strong even when you were freezing to death." "I remember thinking you looked like a bear," Adelaide said with a laugh. "This huge, frightening creature emerging from the storm. Then you spoke, and I heard the kindness in your voice, and I knew I was safe. You were safe from the moment I found you. I would have died before I let anything happen to you." Adelaide squeezed his hand. "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Warren agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play, listening to the wind in the pines. This was happiness, Adelaide thought. Not a single perfect moment, but thousands of ordinary ones strung together like beads on a thread. Mornings waking in Warren's arms, evenings reading by the fire. The birth of their children, the growth of their family, the steady accumulation of shared memories and experiences. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For finding me, for loving me, for giving me this life." Warren lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for letting me, for seeing past the rough exterior to the man underneath, for building this life with me." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Warren and Adelaide sat together, surrounded by the family they had created, in the home they had built, living the love story that had begun with a blizzard and a desperate search through the snow. They had found each other in the wilderness, two lost souls who had become each other's salvation, and they had built something beautiful and lasting from that first desperate meeting. The mountains stood eternal around them, silent witnesses to their happiness, and Adelaide knew that whatever time they had left would be spent exactly like this. Together, home, complete. The blizzard had tried to take her life, but instead it had given her everything she never knew she needed. And Warren, who had tracked her through the snow and brought her home, had become her home in every way that mattered. Their love story was written in the mountains, carved as deep and lasting as the valleys the ancient glaciers had formed. It was a story of survival and strength, of two people who found each other against all odds and built something that would outlast them both in the memories of their children and grandchildren. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared above the peaks, Warren helped Adelaide to her feet and they walked inside together, their hands still linked, their steps still in sync after all these years. Behind them, their grandchildren played on, their laughter echoing through the mountain air, the next chapter in a story that had begun with a storm and a man brave enough to follow a stranger's tracks into the wilderness. And in that moment, Adelaide knew with absolute certainty that every hardship, every moment of fear and pain had been worth it to arrive here, at this perfect happiness, with this man who had given her the world simply by refusing to let her die alone in the snow. Warren had tracked her through the blizzard and brought her home, and in doing so, he had found his own home in her heart. It was a gift beyond measure, and Adelaide would be grateful for it until her dying day, the end.